Good afternoon. Welcome to our virtual Feds, Meds, and Eds luncheon, virtual luncheon. For those that don't know me, my name is Kristen Schrader. I'm the Commercial Business Development Manager for Harkins Builders, which is a general contractor based out of Columbia, Maryland, with 2 regional offices, one in Wayne, Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia, and the other in Charlotte, North Carolina. My shameless plug is I need work, so if you guys have anything, give me a call. That's why we're here. So I want to continue to thank our annual sponsors for 2020. Gold sponsors are Harkins Builders, JLL, and Miles and Stockbridge. Our silver sponsors, Absolute Services Industries, CohnReznick, Copt, Crammon and Graham, Badova Engineering, Rosenberg, Martin and Greenberg, the Brick Companies, the Rockefeller Group. And our bronze sponsors, All Safe Elevator Inspections, Sonero, Simply, Gradeline Construction Company, Power Bank, Infinity Environmental, Katz Abosch, Land Care, Merit Companies, Mona Electric Group, My Cleaning Service, Omega Fire and Life Safety, Penza Bailey Architects, Price Modern, Rupert Landscape, Tyson Krupp Elevator, Unlimited Restoration, VSC Fire and Security, and Whiteford Taylor and Preston. Feel free to do a little thumbs up or, a round of applause for our sponsors. Couldn't do this year without them since we have no money coming in the door. So we have 2 in-person programs coming up, one being the golf tournament scheduled for the afternoon of August 6th. Hopefully you guys have seen that in your inbox and get registered. It'll be our golf clinic, August 6th. And that'll be followed by a round of 9 holes if you choose to do that. And then also open for registration is our golf tournament scheduled for October 1st at Diamond Ridge up in Baltimore County. And our sponsorships are going well, happy to report. So thank you everybody on here who has sponsored the golf tournament already. If anybody on here is interested in sponsorship, please feel free to reach out to me or anybody on the sponsorship committee, Tony Prince or Caitlin Zaro. And get your foursomes registered, and everything can be done online. Registration's open. So, with that said, I believe, Kelsey, tell me, we're going to do gold sponsor speaking, JLL and Miles and Stockbridge?
Yes.
Awesome.
I'll be happy to start. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Andrews. I'm a Senior General Manager at JLL. JLL is a leading professional services firm specializing in real estate and investment management. Our vision is to reimagine the world of real estate, creating rewarding opportunities and amazing spaces where people can achieve their ambitions. In doing so, we will build a better tomorrow for our clients, our people, and our communities. Locally, JLL specializes in leasing and sales, property management, market research, project management, and development, with offices in Baltimore, Columbia, Bethesda, and DC. Please reach out to me or any of the other JLL crew members if there's anything we can do to help you or your clients achieve their real estate goals. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Miles and Stockbridge.
Is there somebody from Miles on who would like to speak today?
Yeah, I guess I'm the only person I think from Miles on today, unless there's somebody else.
I think Michelle was registered, but I just did a quick search.
She couldn't make it. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, but enough for anybody else. You guys are gonna hear enough from me later, so I don't really need to give my pitch. But Miles is a Mid-Atlantic firm. We are a full service firm. We have offices obviously mainly in Baltimore, but also all throughout the sort of DMV. I'm actually based in DC, and that's our second largest office. So, full service firm, law firm, you know what that means. I'll skip to my spiel for later. So thank you though for having me.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to introduce our moderator and we'll get into the panel. So our moderator today is Erin Todd with CohnReznick. She is the Senior Manager at CohnReznick's Baltimore office and a member of the firm's assurance practice. She's been in the firm's real estate practice since she joined CohnReznick in 2007. Erin has extensive experience providing audit and accounting services across the United States to companies in the real estate industry, including commercial real estate investors, developers, and operators, REITs, mortgage lenders, and mortgage servicing companies. She's responsible for identifying and initiating potential growth and expansion opportunities for CohnReznick and supervising and leading the engagement team she works with in providing first-class client services. She consults with her clients throughout the year on technical issues that may encounter, advising them on proper accounting treatments and practical applications and best practices in their industry. Erin also provides technical training and serves as a liaison between her clients and other CohnReznick representatives. Erin has a BS in accounting from the University of Maryland, College Park, and serves as the treasurer for CREWBaltimore on our board of directors. She is a board member of Playworks Maryland, a national organization within the Maryland chapter that partners with local schools and encourages inclusion, leadership, and social and emotional learning to students throughout the power of play. Erin, thank you.
Thank you. I didn't realize my bio was so long. I'll shorten it next time. Whatever I send over next time, I'll make the abridged version. But thank you for having me. I'm not going to say anything else about myself, but I'm going to introduce our panelists in a minute. Our panel today is Feds, Meds, and Eds. So we're going to be talking about real estate in those sectors. And specifically, we're going to, in the current environment, talk a lot about COVID and how that is impacting everything. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to let each one give a little brief overview of who they are and what they do. So we'll start with Steve Ramaley, I believe, at Miles and Stockbridge.
Hey, so thanks for having me. I'm a partner at Miles, and I am actually a member in the of the government contracts practice, which you wonder, why is that applicable to you guys? Well, we actually do a lot of GSA leasing in that practice. So there is a direct nexus to real estate, but we also represent, a significant number of commercial real estate tenants in the DMV, and then also construction firms that either contract directly with the federal government or with private, businesses for development purposes. So we do have the GovCon group in particular has a lot of real estate sort of nexus clients. Also, it just so happens that I was elected to be the regulatory guy to cover all of the CARES Act and related congressional actions. I'm a federal regulatory lawyer first and foremost, my subspecialty being GovCon, right? So understanding sort of the way that Congress works, the way that its bills are then implemented into regulation, is something that sort of I have a background in, and so therefore it made sense that I did that for the firm. And so I know you guys have had other presentations on CARES Act stuff. I don't know if you've had them from lawyers. We kind of have a unique perspective on the matter. And I'm also happy to give you guys any updates about the way the PPP program, the PPP loans have sort of rolled out or not rolled out, as sometimes the case was, idle loans, Main Street lending. Those programs all are important to real estate for obvious reasons, but happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. My internet, I just got a notification that's unstable, so hopefully I'm not going to mess this up too much as we move forward. But I'll turn it over to Emily now. Emily Perl is with Goucher College. Emily, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Associate Vice President for Student Success at Goucher College. I've actually worked there for 24 years after getting a PhD in college student personnel administration at the University of Maryland, College Park. I worked for 18 years in the Student Affairs Division of the college, for 5 years in the academic division of the college, and now work in the enrollment management division of the college, which is not a typical career pattern, but because I've stayed at the same institution for so long, I've sort of moved around, and I think I'm known as someone on our campus who does a lot of bridge building between the different parts of the institution, all in an effort to help our students succeed and provide powerful learning experiences that happen both in and out of the classroom, and making sure that those experiences are well integrated. I'm not an expert on anything to do with real estate. So I think today I will comment more just on, in general, the state of higher education in response to COVID and what's going to be happening this fall, and maybe just a little bit tangentially touch on how that impacts, obviously, real estate and the use of our buildings, our campus properties, etc. So look forward to chatting with you more.
Thank you. And then last but not least, we have Adam Kleeman with CohnReznick.
Hi, I'm Adam Kleeman. I'm an audit partner at CohnReznick. And after spending the first 27 years of my career focusing on commercial real estate, the last few years I've been focusing on the cannabis industry. So Steve and Emily have the feds and eds, and I guess I'm going to cover the meds part as it relates to cannabis and real estate. So it's really been a very interesting intersection between real estate and cannabis, but there certainly is one. That's all I have.
Thank you. Steve, we're going to start with you because you touched on it briefly. And with CREW, we already have done some things on CARE, so we don't need a ton of detail, but I was hoping you could just fill us in on what the latest is with the CARES Act, and if we can expect anything else COVID related in the near term.
Yeah, I'll take that last piece first. So there is a degree of COVID fatigue within Congress, right? And I think we saw it, but it's kind of changing day to day, frankly. I think the Dems right now are actually more interested in a second stimulus package. And that's kind of, look, there's always been, you'll always will see people speaking about these matters on the news. But what I'm listening to mostly is the reports from congressional and Senate staffers who really see what's actually being written and what's being drafted by the members of Congress. And that's where you can really understand not just what the lip service has been to the public, but what they're actually working on. Up until about a week ago, and we had like a preparatory call for this meeting, and I was like, there's nothing going on. And then since then, I've actually heard a few things from different Senate committees and House committees that they are really considering additional stimulus measures, but the contours of those measures are pretty amorphous right now, and it'd be kind of worthless for me to comment on them. They're pretty diverse. The earlier part of your question, really, I think what everyone's probably aware of, the most recent significant news related to the CARES Act is the Flex Act that was passed that changed some things about the Paycheck Protection Program loans, extended the covered period for them, changed, relevant to you guys, changed the mix of payments from needing to be 75% for payroll down to 60%. And that's relevant because it frees up more PPP money to be used on rent, right? So you would think commercial tenants would have more funds available. It doesn't always work that way, but at least theoretically it could work that way. Also, new safe harbors were created that should also benefit commercial real estate lessors, because those safe harbors would enable folks to spend more money on rent again and still get the full amount of their forgiveness. So they're not as discouraged from spending that money on rent and other sort of like, utility costs. The big picture I would say is like the actual headline for the CARES Act right now is that audits are actually starting to happen. It's still low-hanging fruit type of audits from the enforcement folks, so people who took assistance under the CARES Act. That's what I mean by audits of them. Those things are starting to happen. And I would just say this is sort of the first wave. You're seeing some enforcement actions against individuals that overstated their payroll data, for example, but that stuff's going to start to trickle down to people who have misused the funds. And that's going to trickle down even further to people who are not eligible for the funds for whatever myriad reasons they could be accused of not being eligible. And the last thing I would say about the update is that you would think as time goes on, there's sort of a knowledge gap that would shrink between the purpose and legality and statutory language of the program and the public's perception of those things. Like over time, you would think those two areas would merge. My perception is that it's actually sort of widening. For example, there's a lot of bad PR attention on companies owned by high net worth individuals that took the loans. Reality is there's kind of limited information or limited requirements in the CARES Act that said that those people couldn't take the loans. There was a necessity certification that was kind of easy to fudge, for lack of a better word. And so I think Congress probably did intend to let those people take the loans. And there's been a public backlash to it. So there's a bit of an enforcement problem where the public is demanding that these people be held to account for taking public money, where the law might not actually have them done anything wrong in doing so. So it's really interesting to see how that's going to play out. And then maybe the last thing I would say is there was a recent disclosure of everyone who took PPP money, which I'm sure you guys are aware of. One of the sort of scuttlebutts at SBA around that is that that disclosure is rife with errors. There have been a number of like scathing New York Times articles written about private equity firms from Silicon Valley taking the money. And I know some of them, and they didn't take any of the money. So a lot of the data is wrong. And that's something that, you know, is a challenge. It makes the agency look bad. It makes everyone look bad, right? So that's sort of the inside baseball, what's going on. I'll leave it there unless you have questions.
Thank you. Adam, we're gonna switch over to you. This is definitely kind of a new and interesting industry. Can you touch on a few areas or the areas where cannabis and real estate meet?
Sure. I would say most notably, my background is commercial real estate, and I have worked with some REITs in the past during my career, and there are actually now cannabis REITs that have been formed and are operating, and they a REIT has to have a asset class in which it invests, and they have targeted the cannabis industry. For the most part, it's larger grow facilities, but they are also buying assets that have dispensaries as well. So, the traditional banking and as well as the traditional sort of tenant-landlord relationship is a little bit different in the cannabis industry due to the federal illegality of cannabis. So you can't go to, one of the national banks and take out a loan to build a cannabis facility, or enter into a lease with a landlord that has debt on the books for that particular property. So these REITs have raised, their own money and then are buying the facilities and leasing them back to the cannabis companies. And a lot of that's being done as a sale leaseback transaction. So the cannabis company may have initially put the funds in to acquire the building and build it out, but then, they're running short on cash. So they basically flip the asset over to the REIT, get their cash back out, and then, pay rent over the lease term. That's the that's the most notable intersection of cannabis and real estate.
And how has it been impacted? How's the industry been impacted by the pandemic?
It's been impacted favorably, actually. In almost every state except for Massachusetts, cannabis was deemed an essential business. So, as everybody was hoarding toilet paper and everything else, there were a lot of people running to their local dispensary to do the same with cannabis, sort of stock their shelves and make sure that they had their supplies for the long haul. 420 is a big day in cannabis, so there's the normal spike sort of in April for that, but by and large, the cannabis companies have been doing very well through the pandemic. They've had to change some things around as far as the patients coming in to the stores. A lot of them have done curbside pickup, and a lot of states offer delivery as well. So it's, from that aspect, a lot has changed, but and could have an impact going into the future as far as retail space is concerned. But overall, the industry has fared very well. The thing that hasn't fared very well is the capital markets related to cannabis. So cash is a little bit tight, but sales are good.
Good. Emily, we're going to switch over to you now. Can you give us an overview of the current state of higher education? And I think the big thing right now is what colleges and universities are going to be doing this fall.
Sorry, needed to unmute. Sure, happy to do that. And really, it's the current state of higher education. The short one-word answer would be chaos, because everything's changing all the time, and the recent spikes are making people rethink decisions that they had made earlier. As you may well be aware, the main source of income for most of higher education is tuition. Secondly, room and board. So those are the two things that we're most concerned about, losing that income. Some universities have other forms of income. They might have huge endowments. They might have research dollars coming in, or sort of ancillary businesses that they're running. But depending on the type of institution that those other forms of income are barely existent. So obviously institutions are really forced to balance out thinking about our own institutional health from a financial point of view, but then obviously looking more at the health and safety of students, faculty, and staff, and also thinking about surrounding communities, because by reopening, we're really inviting people from all over, students are coming from all over the country and even all over the world to attend our institutions. So bringing in all of that travel into an area, especially smaller towns that might have big universities in them, that's a really big consideration. So I'm gonna share my screen and show you the Chronicle of Higher Education is a major publication that most people who work in higher ed read. And they started in early May, surveying different colleges. Colleges could basically voluntarily fill out this survey. So on May the 15th, as on here, you can see what the plans were. People went out early and said that they were planning for an in-person fall, because obviously at that point, some of them were still recruiting students. You may know that the standard deadline for enrollment deposits is May the 1st, but a lot of colleges moved that to June the 1st this year. There was all sorts of survey data that shows that most students still want an in-person experience. So most colleges wanted to come out early and say that they could deliver an in-person experience. But a lot of people said, hey, these sort of orange and gray areas we're waiting to decide. Some went ahead and said we're going to be online, and some proposing a hybrid model. So that was on May 15th. Then I ran it again last week when this panel started preparing, and you can see it went from 64% in person to 59%. But the thing that grew a lot was the hybrid model. So institutions have gotten a lot smarter about different ways we can deliver our educational value through both on a combination of online and face-to-face, or something even that's called high flex, I'll talk about in a minute. But then interestingly, I just decided to run this again yesterday, because you can go onto their site any given day and look it up. So the in-person went from 59% in 1 week. I mean, this was like 5 days, down to 56%. And I think that's just a reflection of all the spikes that are happening around the country, that we all have these grand plans. I mean, not we all, but many of our institutions, including Goucher, for being in person in the fall. But some of that may all fall apart in the next month, or we may bring students back and then only to turn around and have to send them home. So I wanted to also just comment on the way this is playing out at institutions academically, is that many institutions are changing their academic calendar to think about the needs of how to address COVID issues. So a lot of institutions are starting a little bit earlier and then asking students to limit any travel back and forth to campus, and then sending them home at Thanksgiving time. At Goucher, we're actually making all of our classes a little bit longer so that at Thanksgiving, our semester will be over. Other institutions are sending students home at Thanksgiving, and then saying that you'll be online for like the last 2 weeks of the semester in December. The thinking being that it's more important to establish those relationships between faculty and students and between peers early in the semester, and then later in the semester it'll be okay if they're online, and we really don't want people to go home for Thanksgiving all over the country and then come back again. Another thing is that institutions faculty have had to retool. And one thing I should say is, higher ed is not an industry known for making quick changes. We are usually a very slow moving sector to make change, but this has forced us to make a lot of changes very fast. Particularly faculty are not, have their ways of doing things. So at Goucher this fall, we're going to offer these 4 modalities, and this is not that different than other institutions. So there will be some classes that will be strictly in person. Most of our faculty, and this is what they're most being encouraged to do, are going to go to a high flex or dual mode, where students are in the classroom, but we are putting webcams in all the classrooms. We're putting plexiglass so the faculty can stand behind the plexiglass when they teach. And then, so some students can participate in an online way because of the webcams. Even on some days, maybe a faculty member may not be able to be there as well. So they might just teach remotely and the students would gather in the room. Then there's asynchronous and synchronous online. So basically the difference is, are we all meeting at the same time, or is it being offered in a way that no matter what time zone you're in, you can participate at a time that's convenient to you? So again, it's really forcing, COVID's really forcing higher ed to move on the fly, to be transformative, innovative, and offering all these different options. We're doing things like measuring out our classrooms and marking them off. We're going to have to use every possible space on campus in ways that we've never used it before, so that we can have a smaller number of students in the same amount of space, and or use larger spaces that in the past we would have rented out for big events, will now be used for classrooms. And obviously residential living is another big component of higher ed. And so a lot of institutions are trying to sort of, what the word is, de-densify how many students are living on campus. And so that's going to impact, you know, where students are living, at the cleaning protocols, the types of code of conducts that we have for students, and the need to wear masks, and trying to figure out how to enforce that with traditional age college students, which is quite a challenge. So I'll stop there for right now.
Thank you. I'm actually going to stay with you and just ask if you could also address, with all these changes that colleges and universities are having to make as a result of COVID, what the financial impact is on higher education.
Okay. So obviously I discussed before, it has a huge financial impact. I mean, people are very concerned, especially, I mean, I work at a small private liberal arts college. We are probably one of the most sort of fragile type of institutions in this pandemic, because we sell a residential model, and that's who we are. And so going online is not going to be a popular thing with the kind of students that would want to come to an institution like Goucher. We were already in a demographic downshift in terms of fewer 18-year-olds going to college this fall and in the next few years. So there's going to be huge impacts depending on the sector of higher education that you're in. I'm pulling up this survey that I found that was of college and university business officers that was conducted in early June. So these are some of the actions they had taken already to cut their budgets in early June. There will be a lot more actions taken, but the very first one that would be of interest to you is that most of them are slowing or stopping any capital projects. Most of the rest of the actions have to do with salaries and benefits for staff and faculty, and cutting those, eliminating positions, freezing positions, etc. However, if you look at the long-term financial health, it's kind of strange, but I mean, when you look at, there was, in the survey, they asked the business officers, are you confident about your institution being financially stable over the next 5 years? And there was a very low level of confidence. But this chart shows over the next 10 years, they were asked these same questions in 2019, and 50% agreed that they are confident. And this year, 53%, which kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Although if you break it out by sector, as I said, like a Goucher college is in the baccalaureate private nonprofit. So it has the lowest level of confidence out of all the different sectors. One of the theories is just that the business officers were thinking that the urgency of the crisis will need to lead to needed change, or maybe they responded so positively because of just a feeling of it has to get better from here. And so maybe in 10 years, we will be in a better place.
Yeah, interesting. The community colleges are up. I guess they anticipate a lot of people staying at home. And
yeah, I mean, that is a sector that, tends to draw more local students. So their students are going to go there and then transfer somewhere else later. And that happens in any time there is an economic downturn.
Thank you. Steve, we're going to move back over to you. I was wondering if you could touch on how government contractors with commercial leases are being impacted by COVID, if at all.
Sure. Well, I would say that government contractors in general are probably one of the bright spots in the economy right now. As I was saying earlier, sort of government spending has not decreased. It is, in fact, government spending tends to peak, as probably many of you know, in September towards the end of the fiscal year, right? Government spending has been markedly higher, or at least there have been more frequent instances of government spending within the May, June, July timeframe than we've seen in many years. And it is because of COVID in part. And it's also, there've been a lot of contract actions, moving money around, repurposing existing funding. So our client base in my practice area is very busy. And that, I think, has translated to government contractors not being the kind of tenants that are defaulting on commercial leases, at least not in droves. Like, obviously there are outliers, and we have seen some of that. And in fact, I've done some negotiations around terminations of leases, particularly long-term leases. It's been very difficult dealing with that because the landlord comes to us and says, what do you mean? Your industry is doing well. How are you doing poorly? There's always an outlier, but I think on the whole, that's true. Government contractors are doing well. The way it's been impacted, there's sort of, I would call it like two buckets. One is a positive, one's sort of, and there is a negative to that positive, and then one's just a straight negative. And I'll start with the latter, and that's that as a result of COVID, you're seeing delays to project starts and to occupancy dates being set off, and to just generally the kind of stuff that arises in a force majeure. And and I'm maybe touch on this a little bit later, but force majeure is a big thing that everyone's talking about. In the federal contract space, it works in a very unique way that it might not work in a private commercial relationship. You don't just get a termination of your contract. In the federal government world, you get an excusable delay, right? And that's about it. You don't get any additional money. The way that the government deals with force majeure is it kind of splits the baby of the harm. The harm that they suffer is they don't get delivery on time, but they can't accuse you of default under a force majeure circumstance. You as the contractor suffer the harm because you don't get any additional money to deliver, even if as a result of COVID, you are incurring additional costs, right? So that's the fixed price model, which is, I think, the majority of contract work is on a fixed price or even on T&M basis. The cost type contractors are doing better because their increased costs are recoverable, but I would call that a sort of majority of the contractor base. So on the other side of things, there have been, so the other thing I was talking about, sort of a positive and a negative to COVID for government contractors at least, is that there are a number of programs that are designed to help them. So I already talked about PPP, which has been generally good, but probably isn't enough to really get people through a crisis if they're really suffering a crisis. The other thing that's been specifically available for government contractors that many of you have probably never heard of is something called Section 3610, which is a portion of the CARES Act that allowed government contractors to be paid by the federal government, even if their people are doing absolutely nothing, in order to maintain a ready state, quote unquote, for the federal contractor workforce. But and so that's the good news, right? So when you've got you've got tenants that can't work for their federal customers, their people are still getting paid. And so you are seeing contractors essentially, allegedly, supposedly, buoyed in their financial health as a result of payments being made, even though they're not performing services. Now, in practice, that has not worked out the same way that we hoped it would. So there's been I've been part of a lot of conversations with landlords. Hey guys, aren't you getting 3610 funding? Why can't you, use that to pay your staff, which will free up money to then pay your rent? What's going on here? Well, in practice, 3610 is only available to a sort of narrow subset of contractors, and it's the people who can't work because of a site shutdown or a building that was closed by mandate of the governor in many cases, and simultaneously that work cannot be performed from home, which is the killer for a lot of stuff, because there is a lot of conversion to work from home in the contractor workforce, which I'll touch on in a second. But the other downside is that even where contractors are able to demonstrate entitlement, prima facie entitlement to 3610, so they couldn't go to work because of a governor ordered shutdown, and their people can't work from home because of the nature of what they do, Congress has not appropriated funds, apparently, for the use of 3610. So some agencies have taken the position that they don't have the money to pay these contractors. I think that's a cop-out. I think they're just making an excuse not to pay people. But that's the practical reality is that there are these programs to help contractors, but many people aren't really getting the benefit of them. And then, of course, like as I said earlier, so the upshot of all that is that most government contractors have continued business as usual, or even grown during this time, given the amount of government spending and sort of repurposing of, they're the existing projects, and now they're adding on stuff related to the provision of PPE, related to healthcare consulting, that kind of stuff. And sort of like I'll leave it there for now, actually. There's sort of other aspects to that issue, but we'll talk about it, I'm sure, later on other questions.
Yeah, just to add on to one of the things that Steve was mentioning as far as government spending, there's obviously a lot of money going out from the federal government, and there is a lot of available revenue out there in the form of cannabis taxes, should the federal government ever decide that they want to open that up. And some people think that, as a result of COVID and the government spending, that there is, it could push the legalization of marijuana.
That's actually a good segue into my next question for you, Adam, because I had read that cannabis-related businesses, you alluded to it, also have difficulties with capital markets, but also with leasing potentially, with landlords and their perception of the cannabis industry. So I'm wondering, with the downturn or the hit that retail has taken as a result of COVID, if that you think will fare favorably for cannabis businesses?
Well, in some ways, yes. That there's potential for additional retail space to come online, and depending on how landlords have their property, whether there's debt on it or not, it could certainly lead to more favorable terms going forward for not only cannabis companies but everybody, as they try to backfill spaces that are, have been vacated and so forth. So, if things could swing in favor of the tenants pretty drastically over the next, year or two post-COVID. But as I said earlier, some of these retail spaces have figured out ways to either do curbside pickup and/or delivery. So, it's kind of, on both sides of the fence here. But it's only time will tell what actually happens.
Right, they might not need the space anyway now.
Right.
And what about the REITs? How are they doing business-wise? Are there a lot of acquisitions or other transactions right now?
The ones that are up and running are doing well. The capital markets aren't great right now, so raising money is difficult. Some of the REITs out there do have, did their capital raises earlier in the year, or towards the end of last year, and have cash available for acquisitions. But generally speaking, it's a little bit tight out there right now for raising money. I think people are positioning themselves post-COVID that, once things sort of open up, that they're going to go back to the markets and, find more capital.
And Steve, as far as GSA leasing and GSA real estate, have you seen any impact of COVID on that?
Yes, but I would say it's muted compared to the rest of the marketplace, right? We've seen acquisition workforce problems in the sense that they're busy doing other stuff. So I haven't personally seen a lot of the urgent and compelling stuff. So I should back up and say GSA leasing sort of takes two forms from a competition standpoint. There's the normal, this lease is expiring, we need to reprocure the space. It's a full and open competition. Let's see who all is out there, who's developed new properties since the last time we negotiated a 10-year lease. And so it's a full-blown competition. Then there's the urgent and compelling version of GSA leasing, which is a short-term sort of gap-filling mechanism that can be a more limited competition and usually results in higher rent prices, but a shorter-term lease. And you would think as a result of the acquisition workforce being so constrained that they're going to be utilizing that sort of emergency basis for leasing more. I haven't really personally seen that. Then again, the predominance of my practice, I'll be the first to admit, is not GSA leasing, so maybe that exists. It's something that you should be, looking for. Although, so on the whole, I think GSA leasing is another, bright spot for commercial landlords. Just like having government contractor tenants should be a better position, should position you better than sort of private commercial tenants, given the sort of consistent spending we've seen from the federal government. The same thing should be true, or as we've seen for the last couple of months, seems to be true, that folks with substantial GSA leasing to civilian agencies in particular, obviously the government is the best tenant to have from the perspective of payment. Not necessarily from the perspective of terms and conditions involved with the lease, but certainly from payment. Also, there's been a lot of, when the government asks you to implement particular measures around cleanliness, around sanitation, the landlord is going to be able to get more money for that. And it's a matter of law. They're entitled to more money for that. It's not the typical commercial negotiation. How much are you going to pay me? Well, there's a kind of set standard for how you calculate the amount of it's through a request for equitable adjustment. There's millions of cases on the subject. It's pretty easy to figure it out how you're going to get benefited. So there's some like predictability benefits. Also, GSA leasing is even better than regular government contracting for the the contractor, the landlord in this case, because GSA leasing allows for there to be no terminations for convenience. Every federal contract, kind of except for GSA leasing, is going to allow the federal government to step in and terminate you for convenience whenever they want. Well, they recognize that leasing of real estate is a little bit different, so they don't do that. So I would say that while we haven't seen an explosion in GSA leasing, and I think we have actually seen folks extending leases, not recompeting spaces, I haven't seen the slew of descopes, of shrinkages of spaces that agencies are requiring. I think, and this is what I was saying in one of the breakouts, the federal government kind of works in 18 to 36 month cycles. So they're going to take stock over the next year. And I would think that if there is a hit to GSA leasing, it will actually come next year when they start to realize what their anticipated utilization is going to be. Right now, sort of to Emily's point, sort of the name of the game is kind of chaos, and they're keeping the status quo. But I would look for that. I would look for potential, downsizes in the future. But the federal government also is not going to convert to work from home in the same way that the commercial tenants might. So that's a function of just the anachronistic nature of the federal government first and foremost. But really, the work is sensitive. It needs to not be in the home. Even folks that aren't on classified contracts have FOUO documents. They have other public trust documents that need to be housed in a federal database, a federal system. They're subject to FOIA. You're not going to see the, conversion to everybody's home server being like the entire, data repository for the IRS, for example. It's not going to happen. So again, another reason for it to maybe be a bright spot, even if it's going to be downsized somewhat. And we have seen the acquisition workforce, for example, that mostly doesn't have classified information on their computers, but does as proprietary information. They're figuring out how to work remote. And that's been an interesting thing to see because they've also made a lot of mistakes in doing that, and that have sort of fed the lawyers over there who we sort of operate as sort of watchdogs for the federal rules around procurement. I guess I'll leave it at that. I think it could be GSA leasing is strong, although, I would say strong compared to commercial leasing at the moment. Doesn't mean the zenith of the entire practice over U.S. history. Certainly not.
Thank you. So we have a couple minutes left. We did want to open it up. If anyone had questions for our panelists, you can put them in your chat option, and I can see what people submit and ask questions from there. And I think as we give people a couple minutes to do that, if any of our panelists have any final thoughts, you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I'd just sort of, because Steve brought up the whole work from home. I mean, obviously we're all nationwide proving that we can work from home, most of us. In higher ed in particular, the kind of job I have as an administrator, this fall, I anticipate I will still mostly work from home because I'm holding all my meetings with people via Zoom. And that's, I mean, basically I'm in meetings all day with people. That's what I do in my job. We're not going to gather in small conference rooms. So we're going to keep meeting via Zoom, and we're going to prioritize the students and the faculty as the people that need to be on campus, and those of us that don't need to have that direct contact with students. For the time being, we'll continue to work from home. I mean, I think most institutions of higher ed are going to go back to predominantly staff working on site, because being part of a institutional community is part of the value of most colleges and universities. Though I do think certain sectors of the staff within a university will be able to make a better case that they can do most of their job from home in the future.
Yeah, I would actually, like, not related to the subject I'm supposed to be speaking about, but I think I would love to sort of tell you guys what we feel like on the inside of a law firm and how we're dealing with COVID. And I'll tell you, the traditional model of partners requiring their associates to have lots of face time and be in the office with lots of assistants, that is dying at an accelerated rate. It was already dying, right? That old white shoe law firm model of the past has been on the way out for the last 2 decades. And I think COVID is going to be the thing that really pushes it over. And so you're going to see law firms downsizing their offices. Like, I'm more productive from home. I'm not talking to 30 of the partners in the office with me who I want to socialize with, but like, now that I'm at home, lawyers are by their very nature, I think, kind of entrepreneurial, self-starting people. And so we don't need the structure of an office to be productive. And I think people are learning that. And so I would say your law firm tenants probably not going to be expanding their spaces.
That is very unfortunate news for us builders that do tenant space. If anybody has any questions, I know, does anybody, just feel free to take yourself off of mute and like one at a time.
I do know that some of you were interested in receiving Emily's images of the graphic and the text that she shared, and she is gracious enough to send that out to everyone. So I'll follow up from this call with that document, just so you have that for yourselves as well. So thank you, Emily.
Welcome. I just wanted to say also regarding, a side effect. A school like Goucher is very small, and we're going to use every space we have on campus this fall because because of the need for physical distancing. Even though we're going to have fewer students and fewer staff on campus, we'll be using every possible space. And we're small enough that we will actually be able to house most of the students who want housing. But a place like Towson University, my understanding is they are trying to de-densify their housing to the point where only about half the students are being told that they can live on campus. And the other half of the students are going to be figuring out if they're commuting from home, if they're renting area apartments, etc. So I think there will be a lot more rentals in the area from some of the larger universities.
We recognize that there is a major hit in the commercial real estate industry, and we have taken on an opportunity to offer at 2/3 our normal fees a way to help commercial real estate tenants or landlords who don't want their tenants to give up space to clearly reposition furniture, systems, etc., so that their staff can come back and feel comfortable being distanced. And if there are people who are constantly talking to the landlords about giving up space, and the landlords certainly don't want to do that, we would offer to help move perhaps one wall, two walls if necessary, so that the tenant can position themselves so that they can take it upon themselves to sublet a portion of their space so that the landlord doesn't have to take the hit. We're writing an article now and submitting today for a healthcare magazine that helps doctors realize how they can get their patients back into the office and assure them that they'll be safe. And everybody's doing the same thing. So take advantage. We're charging 2/3 what we normally do.
Thank you. So we are just about at time. So thank you to CREWBaltimore. Thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to join us today. And thanks for having me as the moderator. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.